You didn't wake up one day and decide to care less. It happened quietly, gradually, almost without your permission. And the strangest part, you're not even sure when it started. There's a specific kind of silence that settles in when someone stops investing in people. Not the silence of hatred, not the silence of anger, just a slow, almost polite withdrawal. Texts sit unanswered for hours, not out of spite, but because the energy to respond simply isn't there. Plans get canceled, not because something came up, but because the idea of being around people suddenly feels heavier than being alone. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. You still show up, you still smile, you still function, but something underneath has quietly shifted, like a frequency that changed just slightly, enough that the signal doesn't quite come through anymore. And what makes this so disorienting is that there's no clear villain in the story. No dramatic falling out. No single moment you can point to. Just a gradual fading of enthusiasm, of curiosity, of the pull you once felt toward other people. So what's actually happening inside the mind when this occurs? One of the first places to look is emotional exhaustion, and not the kind that comes from doing too much work. This is a different type of tired. It's the exhaustion of always being the one who listens, the one who adjusts, the one who holds space for everyone else while quietly wondering who's holding space for them. At first, you don't notice the imbalance. You keep showing up because that's what you do. But the mind is always keeping count, not consciously, but biologically. The nervous system tracks what it gives and what it receives. And over time, when that ledger stays consistently unbalanced, something shifts. You don't become cold. You become careful. Conversations that once felt natural start to feel like obligations. Social situations that used to energize you now feel like something to get through. And the people you once reached out to freely, you start waiting to see if they'll reach out first. But here's what most people never notice about this stage. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a loss of ability. Like the part of you that used to generate social energy has simply gone quiet. Then there's the role that disappointment plays. And it's more structural than most people realize. The human brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly building models of how people will behave, what to expect from them, whether they're safe. And every time someone breaks that model, every time a trusted friend disappears when things get hard, every time vulnerability is met with distance instead of closeness, the brain updates. It doesn't update dramatically. It updates quietly. It just lowers the threshold, becomes a little more cautious, invests a little less, and after enough updates, the default setting changes. Getting close starts to feel dangerous, not because anything terrible happened, but because the accumulated weight of small disappointments rewired what feels safe. This is where something important gets misread, by the person experiencing it and by the people around them. What looks like indifference from the outside is often protection happening from the inside. The pulling back isn't withdrawal, it's a learned adjustment. The mind doing exactly what minds are designed to do, adapt to what it's been shown. But not every version of this shift comes from pain. Some of it comes from growth, and that's the part that rarely gets discussed. As people move through their 20s and 30s, something subtle happens to what they need from connection. The conversations that once felt electric, hours spent talking about nothing in particular, filling silence just to fill it, start to feel hollow. Not because the people involved are less interesting, but because something internal has changed about what feels meaningful. You start craving depth over frequency, presence over availability. The kind of conversations where something real gets said, versus the kind where everything stays carefully on the surface. And here's the uncomfortable part of this. The people you once felt close to haven't necessarily done anything wrong. They're the same. It's just that you're no longer the same version of yourself who needed what they offered. Growth creates distance that has nothing to do with conflict. It's just two people moving at different speeds in different directions with different internal landscapes. That kind of loneliness, the loneliness of outgrowing people, is one of the quietest and least talked about experiences in adult life. Because there's no one to blame and no clean way to explain it. There's another layer underneath all of this, and it has to do with energy. Specifically with finally becoming aware of where yours goes. At some point, certain people start to look less like connections and more like cost, not in a calculating way, more like a slowly developing clarity. You start noticing after certain conversations that you feel worse than before they happened. That certain environments leave you with a specific kind of depletion that takes days to recover from. That some people only appear when they need something and disappear when the current flows the other direction. And once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. So the pulling back begins, quietly, without announcements, without explanations, not out of cruelty, but out of a growing sense that protecting your internal state matters, that peace is not a luxury, that your energy is finite, and you've been spending it in places that never replenished it. It doesn't look dramatic, but it changes everything. There's one more thread worth following here, and it might be the most invisible of all. Sometimes losing interest in people isn't exhaustion, and it isn't growth. It's something that looks almost identical to both, but comes from a different place entirely. It comes from still being in the middle of healing. Healing, in the way most people actually experience it, doesn't look like opening up. It doesn't look like becoming warmer or more connected. It often looks like the opposite. Quieter, more withdrawn, less available. Like a person who's been running on empty finally allowing themselves to stop. The mind, when it's processing old pain, old betrayals, old grief, old versions of itself it hasn't fully let go of, requires a kind of solitude that can be mistaken for detachment. It's not that the person doesn't want connection. It's that they don't currently have the internal resources to do connection safely. Not without giving something they don't yet have to give. And this phase can last longer than anyone expects. It can outlast the original wound, because sometimes the mind holds on to its protective posture long after the original danger is gone. Not out of stubbornness, but out of something that once kept it safe. What all of these threads share is something that rarely gets named directly. Each one of them, the exhaustion, the disappointment, the growth, the protection, the healing, each one involves the mind doing something deliberate, something that, from the outside, looks like absence, like coldness, like not caring. But from the inside, it's almost always the opposite. It's the mind trying, in the only way it currently knows how, to take care of itself. The withdrawal is rarely about the people being left behind. It's about something happening internally that needs space, that needs quiet, that needs, for a while at least, less input from the outside world and more room to figure out what's actually true on the inside. And that distinction between what this looks like from the outside and what it actually is on the inside matters more than most people realize. Because the version of this that gets labeled as distant or closed off or hard to reach is often just someone trying to find their way back to a version of themselves that feels stable enough to be present again. There's something worth sitting with. At the end of all of this, the people who lose interest in others, gradually, quietly, without drama, are not people who stopped caring. They're people who cared so much for so long, in ways that weren't always met or matched, that something inside them learned to be more careful with where that caring goes. And underneath the distance, underneath the silence, underneath the slow withdrawal from a world that sometimes asked for too much, there's usually not indifference. There's just someone who's still figuring out what it means to be around people in a way that doesn't cost them themselves. That's not the end of connection. It's the beginning of understanding what real connection actually requires.